Before tragedy struck and changed everything, John Valentino was a driven businessman, known for his sharp mind and strong presence in finance. He built his career manipulating currency markets for high-profile clients, including powerful hedge funds. His success brought him wealth and influence, but also enemies, setting the stage for a betrayal that would upend his life. John believed he had control over both his work and personal life. On the surface, his marriage to Eleanor seemed ideal, yet beneath the appearance of success, a deep betrayal was brewing, ready to devastate him. What happened next was no ordinary robbery. It was a carefully orchestrated conspiracy by those he trusted. One August morning, John's life took a terrifying turn. After a normal start to the day, he entered his building's elevator, where two strangers joined him. Their casual conversation quickly became threatening. Without warning, John was attacked. His final thought before losing consciousness was the grim realization that he had been set up. But it was too late. "Mr. Doe!" a voice called, louder now, as he felt sharp pain in his hand, his index finger being crushed. Good, he thought, but he couldn't breathe and felt weighed down. "You're in the hospital, John," the voice was clearer. "I need to run a few tests, then you can sleep." Hospital. Sleep. "Open your eyes, John." He struggled but managed to glimpse light. "Good, try again." A blinding light stabbed at his senses, then vanished. "Can you squeeze my hands?" He felt pressure and tried to move. "Great, now wiggle your toes." A sharp scrape on his foot made him flinch. "Excellent. You're improving, Mr. Doe. Rest again." Darkness came. When he regained awareness, it felt like he was rising from a heavy weight, struggling to break free. He felt cool air from a fan, his legs moving as if walking in bed. But he wasn't. Was he? A faint beep sounded behind him, followed by brief buzzes on his right, and then a persistent chime. He tried to turn his head, triggering an alarm near his feet. "What's happening?" he thought, confused. "Hey there, mate," a friendly voice said. He heard a chair move, and a hand touched his shoulder. "You're waking up after being in a coma for a long time." Something tugged on his arm, and the beeping stopped. "I'm Brian, one of the nurses taking care of you." He tried to speak, but nothing came out. "You can't talk yet because there's a tracheostomy tube in your neck to help you breathe. You're on a ventilator, but we're hoping to remove it soon." He felt a damp cloth wipe his right eye and cheek. "What's wrong with my face?" he wondered. He couldn't feel the left side. "Try to open your eye, John. I'll dim the lights," Brian said. "Okay, give it a try." John blinked, seeing a blurry light. The cloth wiped his eye again, and things brightened. "We're clearing ointment from your eye after the drops," Brian explained, wiping again. The room slowly came into focus, and a figure stood over him. "Blink a few times, it'll help," Brian said, becoming clearer to John. Long brown hair, a short beard, and a stethoscope over dark blue scrubs. "Welcome back, buddy. It's been a long journey," Brian said with a grin, holding a red flashlight. "I'm going to check your eye, okay?" The light was bright but manageable. "Great. Now for the next part. Squeeze my fingers." John squeezed. "Good. Now wiggle your toes." John wiggled them. "All right," Brian said, tapping a tablet. "We're calling you John because we don't know your real name, but you've responded to it. So, is your name John? Nod or shake your head." John nodded. "Yes. 2 points for the red team," Brian laughed, updating his tablet. "You're in the ICU at St. Joe's. You've been here for over a month. It's Wednesday, September 29th, 2021. John struggled to process the information through his foggy mind. "If you look by the door, you'll see a whiteboard with the date and the names of your doctor and the staff working with you," Brian explained, pointing. "I'm Brian, and Dr. Belkin is the intensivist. Ma is your medical assistant, and RT is your respiratory therapist." Brian walked back to the bed. "It's 2 a.m., and we're in the middle of the night shift." He held up a clear plastic tube. "This is a suction catheter. I'm going to clear the spit from the back of your mouth." John heard a slurping sound, but barely felt anything. "Other things you should know," Brian continued. "You have a tracheostomy tube, an NG tube in your stomach, and a catheter in your bladder, so you might feel like you have to pee." John did, in fact, feel that way. "Don't worry, your urine's going into a bag by your bed," Brian reassured him. "We've tied your wrists with soft restraints to keep you from pulling anything out while you're still medicated. Once you're off the ventilator, we can remove them if you promise not to tug at anything." Brian's voice softened. "Are you in pain? Squeeze my hand if you are." John shrugged, unsure. "Okay, we want to keep you comfortable, but not too out of it," Brian explained, pointing at a row of medical instruments. "You're on a lot of pills right now. but we'll reduce them when we can." None of it made sense to John, so he stared at the ceiling and drifted off. His sleep was filled with horrific dreams of pain and fear, images that faded quickly. John woke gasping for air, alarms blaring on his left. His left side remained bandaged, and he coughed, feeling intense pain in his throat and chest. "Easy does it," a gentle female voice said. A blonde woman appeared. "I'm Sarah, your respiratory therapist. We're weaning you off the ventilator. Are you in pain?" John nodded, the sharp pain in his face making itself known. His legs moved slightly, guided by robotic attachments, making him walk in place while lying down. "I'll get your nurse," Sarah said before disappearing. Later, John woke more alert. The ventilator was being replaced by a misting blue hose, and he sat higher in bed. His legs were now free of the robotic devices, and he felt clearer. It was a busy morning with doctors, nurses, and therapists coming and going. He was moved to another part of the hospital for scans. The nurses praised his progress, though John didn't understand all the medical jargon. They helped him sit in a chair and stand briefly. The doctors assured him his brain was intact, despite suffering a traumatic brain injury, TBI. One doctor remarked that his shattered skull had prevented his brain from herniating due to swelling. The highlight for John was when they removed the catheter, allowing him to urinate on his own. Simple pleasures, he thought. A few days later, John woke to find several strangers in dark suits gathered around his bed, giving him an uneasy feeling. "Mr. Doe," said the tallest man, with unruly red hair and a gray goatee. His dark eyes looked serious. "I'm Dr. Everett J. Malcolm," he continued without offering a handshake. John swallowed nervously and nodded. Though he still had a track tube, it had been replaced with a smaller one that would let him speak with the Passy-Muir valve. But he didn't have it on now, so he stayed silent. "I represent a medical research consortium," Dr. Malcolm said in a dismissive tone, "involved in cutting-edge medical and biochemical advancements." He shrugged slightly, frowning. "We've monitored your progress for the past 7 weeks and contributed to it. We want to discuss your rehabilitation and other options you might consider." John's shaky hand reached for his dry erase board. He wrote, "What is this about, Doctor?" Malcolm read the board and replied, "It's best to first go over your current situation and what led to it before discussing options." He motioned to a woman in a white lab coat with short hair and a stern expression. She stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Mr. Doe," she began, "you've been hospitalized for nearly 2 months." She paused John's attempt to write. "We don't know exactly how you were injured. Passers-by found you, thought you were dead after a severe striking." She showed John gruesome admission photos from the ER. He turned his head to see them clearly. "The ambulance took you to the nearest ER for a pass-away declaration," she continued. "But they found you were barely alive. This was on August 14th. John blinked, processing. "You had no ID, and your fingerprints matched no database. No tattoos, scars, or surgeries to identify you. Facial recognition was impossible." John started writing again, but she stopped him. "It doesn't matter who you are, Mr. Doe. As far as anyone's concerned, you're dead." She showed him a pass-away certificate. "You technically died 3 times in the first week." She paused. "You've also accumulated a massive medical bill," she added, flipping the tablet to show over $1 million. "That doesn't even include our life-saving interventions," Dr. Malcolm noted. "You haven't started rehab yet, and you're already deep in debt." John thought, what a bedside manner. Dr. Malcolm continued, "Your situation presents unique opportunities we think you should consider before deciding your next steps." A man of East Asian descent stepped forward and bowed slightly at the foot of John's bed. "Mr. Doe," he began to be brief, "you have a long road ahead before you can hope to return to a normal life. You're still dealing with a serious head injury, more broken bones than I can list, a significant spinal cord injury causing at least partial paralysis on your left side, and your left eye has been destroyed along with much of the surrounding tissue and bone. Additionally, your reproductive organs have been severely damaged, and it's uncertain if your right testicle is still functional." The news was overwhelming, and John struggled to process it. No one had told him the full extent of his injuries until now. He grimaced, trying to remember something concrete, but all he could recall were vague, nightmarish images. Dr. Malcolm cleared his throat, pulling John's focus back. "In a way, you can thank our early intervention for the fact that you're here today," he said, almost casually. "But let's discuss the 2 paths ahead of you." He removed his gold-rimmed glasses, fogged them with his breath, and wiped them with a silk cloth. "You can continue with the current care plan. which involves transferring you to a rehab facility specializing in helping you regain strength, mobility, and independence. He put his glasses back on. However, with no insurance or substantial payment information, your care will be subpar at best. John felt his anxiety rising again, the urge to flee from the room growing stronger amid the cold stares and businesslike suits. Dr. Malcolm's voice cut through the tension. "There's another option." He stepped back, allowing a younger, nervous-looking man with a tablet to approach John's bed. "Mr. Doe," the young man stammered, "before we proceed, we need you to sign some forms." He handed the tablet to John, whose eyes scanned the small print. "You can read it all, of course," the young man added with a weak laugh, "but we'd all be old and gray by the time you finish." He cleared his throat, realizing his joke had fallen flat. "Your first signature gives us authorization to treat you, access to your records, and the power to act on your behalf in legal and medical matters for the immediate future." John hesitated before pressing the yellow signature button. He scribbled his name with his finger. "Great," the young man said, visibly relieved. He flipped to another screen. "The next signatures are important. First, by agreeing to our treatment, you accept the risks and agree not to hold us responsible for any mishaps or adverse outcomes." He winked at John. "Don't worry, Mr. Doe. You'll be in better hands than at a hospice rehab." He swiped to the final screen. "Lastly, this is our non-disclosure agreement. By signing, you agree not to discuss any aspect of your care from now on." John looked at the screen, then set the tablet down. He picked up his dry erase board and slowly wrote, "What do I get in return?" Dr. Malcolm nodded approvingly. "A fair question, Mr. Doe. While I can't promise you'll return to 100%, I can assure you we'll provide the best possible outcome." He crossed his arms, smiling. "In fact, with our unique technologies, you may even exceed your previous limits. Of course," he added, "there are no guarantees." John glanced at the tablet again, still uncertain. Another man from the group softly cleared his throat, drawing a frown from Dr. Malcolm. "If I may, sir," the man said quietly, turning to John. "Mr. Doe, I should also mention that by volunteering for our experimental program, all of your financial liabilities will be forgiven, regardless of the outcome." John looked back at Dr. Malcolm, who gave a subtle nod. Taking a deep breath, John lifted the tablet and scribbled his signature again before handing it back. "Excellent, Mr. Doe," Dr. Malcolm said with a gleam in his eye. "Your new program will begin shortly. You'll be transferred to our facility by this evening." The group of strangers left the room as quietly and quickly as they had arrived. John lay back, his mind racing with what had just transpired. By the time John arrived at the new facility, everything felt like a blur. A petite doctor named Janice Willoughby, with shoulder-length brown hair and large glasses, introduced herself. "When you first came to our attention," she said clinically, "your chances of survival were less than 5%. Standing about 5 feet 6 inches tall with a rail-thin figure hidden in scrubs beneath an oversized lab coat, her voice was calm and methodical, like she was reading from a textbook. "We've been monitoring your progress and have played a significant role in your recovery," she continued. "Your brain was so swollen from the trauma that if your skull hadn't been opened, you would have died. Fortunately, your brain was able to expand beyond the cranial limits, which allowed you to survive." She pointed to MRI, Connecticut, and PT scans on a nearby monitor. The images meant nothing to John, but Dr. Willoughby went on. "Your injuries were extensive, a Lefort 3 fracture to your facial structure, traumatic damage to your left orbital socket, resulting in permanent optical nerve damage. That eye is irreparable. You also suffered right testicular torsion leading to the loss of the organ. You had multiple lung contusions, broken bones in your legs, arms, ribs, and left collarbone." John flinched internally as she listed the damage. "We've repaired or reconstructed most of your facial bones," she continued, "but the swelling and scarring persist." She produced a small silver bag. "To control the swelling and pressure, we administered mannitol to draw fluid away from your brain. But in your case, its effectiveness was limited due to the extensive damage elsewhere." She held up the bag. "This, along with several other treatments, saved your life." John stared at the bag, his thoughts muddled, his body still throbbing with pain. Dr. Willoughby's voice continued, mentioning the advanced technologies involved in his ongoing recovery. "We've also introduced a synthetic blood plasma replacement," she said, "which contains millions of nanobots that respond to telemetric commands. They help regulate your blood flow, prevent clotting, and repair damaged tissues. These nanobots will remain in your system for life." John barely grasped what she was saying. It felt surreal, like he was part of some strange sci-fi experiment. She paused, her intense gaze fixed on him. Tomorrow will begin the next phase of your treatment. We'll be correcting your spinal vertebrae and addressing the nerve pathways that are causing paralysis on your left side. John cleared his throat, testing his voice for the first time. How long will that take? It's a routine procedure, she replied matter-of-factly. You should be back in your room by noon. We'll have a clearer idea of your left side deficits shortly after. Sounds peachy, doctor, John muttered with a weak smirk. 2 months earlier, on Saturday, August 14th, just after 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, John Valentino hurried home. He stepped off the bus and rushed the half-block to his apartment building, a 50-story high-rise. The doorman gave him a nod as he passed by. Screwing with Nikki, he grumbled, irritated at wasting so many hours just to keep up with the Asian markets. He reached the elevator bank and pressed the up button. 2 other men joined him as he waited. A door slid open and they all stepped into the elevator. He pressed the button for the 36th floor, and one of the men pressed the button for the 40th. John frowned, knowing that floor belonged to a hedge fund he'd worked with before. You're Mr. Valentino, right? A thick Jersey accent asked from behind him. Yeah, who's asking? John shrugged, not bothering to turn around. Our buddy Lenny told us about you. Said you're a real shark in the markets. Lenny who? John asked, frowning. As he began to turn, a loud clicking noise erupted, and his head exploded in a blinding flash of pain and white light. Johnny, a voice sang mockingly. Hey, Johnny! He was jolted back to consciousness by the sharp sting of ammonia in his nose. His head pounded and his eyes watered. He moaned and tried to move, but he couldn't. There he is, said the same smooth, mocking voice. John's vision cleared, and he found himself staring up at a middle-aged man with an angular, hawk-like face. The man wore a 3-piece Italian suit, his black hair slicked back, and he reeked of cheap cologne. He grinned down at John while holding the smelling salts at arm's length. What? John's throat was dry. Hey, Johnny, welcome back. Who are you? John asked as he began noticing more details of his predicament. His hands were tied behind his back, his feet bound, and he was lying unclothed on a cold, hard linoleum floor. What's this? He struggled but couldn't move. The man stood up straight, tossing the smelling salts aside. His smile didn't waver. I'm Leonard Rousseau. My friends call me Lenny, he said. And this, he gestured around, is the first day of the rest of your life, however long that may be. John's head throbbed as he tried to process what was happening. Why are you doing this to me? Stand him up, boys, Lenny ordered. The 2 men from the elevator appeared and grabbed John by the arms, pulling him to his feet. He swayed but remained held firmly. He glanced around, trying to recognize his surroundings, but nothing was familiar. His gaze returned to Lenny, filled with fear. You see, Johnny, it's like this. Lenny paced in front of John. You've been working hard, manipulating the currency markets for a colleague of mine. He stopped, grinning in John's face. And you've done a great job. Lenny waved a device that looked like a cattle prod in front of John's face. But I also know you've been siphoning off some of this colleague's capital into a nice, discreet offshore account, supposedly to protect it from prying eyes. A cold sweat broke out across John's body. No one knew about his secret transfers. No one except him and Andrea, his employer. Unless... I don't know... John began to deny it. But Lenny moved swiftly, activating the taser and jabbing it into his chest. A scream ripped from John's throat as 50,000 volts surged through his body, sending every muscle into violent spasms. The pain was unbearable, and John blacked out briefly. Don't take me for a fool, Mr. Valentino, Lenny shouted angrily, grabbing John's face and forcing him to look into his eyes. My patience is running thin. I want the account numbers and access codes to those offshore accounts, and I want them now. This only gets worse for you the longer you hold out. Please, John gasped when he regained his voice. You don't understand. No, wait, he cried as Lenny raised the taser again. Lenny sneered, shaking his head. Johnny, Johnny, Johnny. He wagged a finger in John's face. Ellie was right about you, you know. John's heart sank instantly. Eleanor. They must have gotten to her first, tortured her. His wife, just shy of their first anniversary, had been waiting for him to come home so they could celebrate. They must have grabbed her right after he left the office. He had just spoken to her as he was heading out. Eleanor! He struggled with renewed strength as the 2 thugs held him tightly. What have you done to her? He demanded. I swear! Lenny burst into laughter, as if he'd just heard the best joke. "What have I done?" he howled. "Man, you're a real idiot." More laughter echoed from behind as John, weary, turned his head from side to side. "Hey, Ellie, baby, come here and tell this sap what I've been doing to you," Lenny called out. John turned his head toward the soft sound of high heels clicking as she came into view. "Hello, Johnny," she said smoothly, her voice rich and confident as she moved to stand beside Lenny, pressing herself against him. Shock, confusion, and heartbreak collided in John's head as he stared at her wide-eyed. There was no emotion in her cornflower blue eyes as she gazed at him. Eleanor de Mercurio Valentino, standing 5 feet 8 inches tall, looked as elegant as ever. Her burnished bronze hair, cut to shoulder length, shone in the light, and she wore a stylish seafoam green evening gown with 4-inch white leather stilettos. She looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. "Ellie, what?" John stammered. "Oh, Johnny," Lenny chuckled. "For someone as smart as you, you're a complete moron." He grinned at the men holding John. "You seriously have no clue, do you?" Laughter echoed around them. "This lady you married?" Lenny wrapped an arm possessively around her waist. "She's my girl." The two kissed passionately in front of him, locking lips and tangling tongues. Disbelief and fury fought within John as his legs nearly gave out under the firm grip of his captors. "How could this be? I bet you didn't know I was screwing her right before she walked down the aisle to you," Lenny laughed again. "I've been with Ellie here since she was sneaking out of her mom's house." John dropped his head in defeat, staring miserably at the floor. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to stop the tears of frustration from falling. "Aw, baby," Eleanor crooned. "Look, you made him cry," she giggled cruelly. John took ragged breaths, trying to process the ultimate betrayal. How had he missed the signs? When he opened his eyes, she was standing right in front of him, a sneer twisting her once lovely face. This wasn't the Eleanor he had fallen in love with and married. She was a completely different person. This Eleanor was darker, more confident, and completely devoid of love or compassion. "Tell him what he wants to know, Johnny, and it'll go much easier for you," she said coldly, lifting his chin with a manicured fingernail. "You always said you'd do anything for me, right, baby?" She suddenly transformed, her voice soft and sweet like the woman he used to know and trust. "Don't you want me to be happy, sweetheart?" she cooed seductively. Anger surged through John as he glared at her, catching her off guard for just a moment before the cold, cruel version of her returned. She released his chin and reached down, grabbing him roughly by his groin. Her nails dug painfully into his skin as she shook him. John cried out in agony as her nails sank deeper, crushing him. "Give us the account numbers and codes," she shrieked in his face. "Whoa, easy there, sweetheart," Lenny laughed, pulling her away. "We're saving the jewels for last, babe." He turned to her as he began unfastening his trousers. "You want to go after his manhood? Let's show him what you've got." A wicked gleam lit up Eleanor's eyes as she looked back at John with a smirk. She knelt in front of Lenny, humiliating John further. "See this, baby?" she taunted John. "This is what a real man is." John tried to look away, but one of the men holding him grabbed his head and forced him to watch. Nausea washed over him as he was made to witness the degrading act. Lenny took her right there, and tears streamed down John's face as the last remnants of his love for her burned away in a fiery rage. The betrayal was unbearable, but watching her enjoy it made it even worse. When Lenny was finished, he grinned at John. "You like that? Now let's get back to business." Hope slipped away from John. His body was broken, his spirit shattered. The pain barely registered anymore as he tried to retreat into himself. But Lenny wasn't done. He clicked the taser back on. "One more chance, Johnny," he said, his voice icy. "Give me the codes or you won't survive much longer." John, exhausted and devastated, choked out, "Please, just let her go. Don't hurt her." Lenny sneered. "Oh, Johnny, you still don't get it, do you?" He gestured to Eleanor. "She's been in on this the whole time. She's not the sufferer you are." John looked at her, his heart sinking even lower. She stood there, calm, without a trace of the woman he once loved. "Tell him, Ellie," Lenny ordered. Eleanor smiled coldly. "It's true, Johnny. I never loved you. This was always about the money. Just give him what he wants and make it easier on yourself." John's last bit of hope crumbled. He was utterly alone, and everything he thought he knew was a lie. Lenny leaned in close, his voice a dangerous whisper. "What's it going to be, Valentino?" Unable to endure any more, John broke. "Fine," he gasped. "I'll give you the codes. Just, just stop. Lenny's wolfish grin returned. Good boy. They dragged John back into the chair, and Eleanor sat at the laptop, ready to input the codes. Through gritted teeth, John began reciting the numbers and passwords, each word draining the last bit of his will. Once the codes were entered, Lenny checked the screen, his face lighting up with satisfaction. See? That wasn't so hard, was it? John slumped in the chair, barely conscious, his body racked with pain from the endless torture. His vision blurred and his mind swirled in a fog of betrayal and agony. Well, Johnny, thanks for cooperating, Lenny mocked. He nodded to his thugs, Sal and Polly. Finish him. John closed his eyes, welcoming the darkness. He didn't care anymore. Everything he loved was gone. Suddenly, a boot slammed into his ribs, jolting him with fresh pain. This time, it felt different. With a grim satisfaction, John realized he had lived long enough to give them the codes, but something deep inside him refused to die, an ember of rage that wouldn't burn out. In a last desperate act, John lifted his bound hands and struck Lenny in the groin with all his remaining strength. Lenny screamed, stumbling back in pain. I won't let you win, John muttered, the last ounce of defiance fueling his broken body. Lenny, enraged, clutched himself and roared, You son of a witch! John didn't see the boot that slammed into his face, plunging him into darkness for the final time. As John slipped into the abyss, he felt a grim sense of satisfaction hearing Lenny's furious scream. He bit me! God damn it, he bit me! A boot came crashing down on his head, and then there was only silence. Returning to the present, it was Friday, October 15th. Monique Thibodeau was a striking woman of mixed heritage, inheriting the best features from her French mother and African-American father. Her angular facial features, high cheekbones, and dusky gray eyes gave her a captivating look. Her hair, bleached to a light copper color, was straightened to fall evenly to her shoulders, with step bangs accentuating her thin eyebrows and piercing gaze. Monique often wore skin-tight leggings and halter tops, but during pool therapy with John, she opted for a revealing one-piece swimsuit. John had met Monique shortly after his spinal surgery, and they had spent countless hours together since. When she wasn't guiding him through ambulation or resistance exercises, she helped him with daily tasks, dressing, cooking, eating, washing, and shaving. As his massage therapist, she also worked with him to regain control of routine functions like typing, texting, and using a remote. John had developed a mix of admiration and frustration toward her. No matter how angry or abusive he got, Monique remained cheerful and positive. Despite his irritation, he couldn't deny her success. As he regained strength and independence, he learned that nanobots played a major role in his rehabilitation, helping his muscles recover faster and grow leaner. One Saturday evening, Monique appeared in his room wearing a terry-cloth robe and carrying a tray. She smiled at his weary expression and laughed lightly. "Don't look too happy to see me, John," she teased as she sat on the edge of his queen-sized bed. The robe parted at her knees, revealing a length of her long, mahogany-toned leg. "You can relax. I'm not here in any official capacity." "Well, not quite," she added with a playful grin. John grumbled. "I thought we were done for the day, Mon." He didn't really mind her presence, though. In fact, he found himself more drawn to her each day, though he was sore all over and had been looking forward to a good night's rest. "I spoke to Dr. Willoughby earlier," Monique said, placing the tray on the bed. "She mentioned needing a sample." She smiled mischievously. "A seed sample, to be exact." John's eyes widened in surprise. "What?" Monique gave him a coy smile. "She wanted you to self-express tomorrow morning, but I convinced her we could get it sooner." She lifted a small packet from the tray. John was speechless as she stood and slowly untied her robe, letting it fall open. His eyes followed her every move, taking in her flawless body. She sat back on the bed, leaning in to cradle his scarred face in her soft hands. She kissed him, and John's mind raced. He had admired her beauty for some time, but never imagined this. Her touch was gentle yet intense, stirring something deep within him. For the first time since his injury, John felt desire. Monique took the sample with clinical precision, but there was an undeniable closeness in her actions. When she finished, she stood up with the tray and began walking toward the door. John's eyes stayed on her, captivated by her graceful movements. As she reached the door, it unexpectedly opened. Dr. Willoughby entered, her expression neutral. She took the tray from Monique without a word and left. Monique turned back to John with a smile. She walked back to the bed, her robe still open, and crawled under the covers beside him. John welcomed her embrace, wrapping his arms around her as they kissed again, this time with deeper passion. When they finally pulled apart, Monique gazed lovingly into his eyes. "Now we're free to make all the love we want," she whispered. Her words were music to his ears. John had never thought he could feel warmth or connection again after everything he'd been through. But here she was, bringing him back to life. Their relationship grew deeper, blending physical rehabilitation with emotional support. Monique was always by his side, guiding him through the darkest moments of his recovery. At the same time, John underwent intense psychological counseling to piece together his fragmented memories and cope with the emotional trauma. As more memories of the violence he endured resurfaced, he began having nightmares. No amount of physical therapy or nanobot technology could ease the weight of his mental anguish, but waking up in Monique's arms every morning gave him a small sense of peace. As John's physical recovery progressed, other staff at the Institute began taking notice, eager to test the limits of his body. He underwent a variety of challenges, from strength tests to endurance trials. At one point, they even exposed him to extreme solar radiation in a high-tech tanning booth, watching as his skin absorbed the misuse without reddening, though he did end up with an impressive tan. He wasn't quite an Olympic athlete yet, but his potential was undeniable. However, there was one area that continued to trouble the doctors, his left eye, or rather its absence. Throughout his rehabilitation, he wore an eye patch over a soft orbital prosthetic. He had several delicate surgeries to reconstruct his optic nerves and orbital structure. Finally, the day came when he was ready for his mechanical eye. Sitting in a room full of doctors, John listened as they explained the pros and cons of the device. One doctor handed him a model and described how it would connect to his remaining nerve fibers. "This is all cutting-edge technology and highly experimental," the doctor explained. "So, I'm a guinea pig," John joked, trying to lighten the mood. "In a way, yes," the doctor replied. "But on the bright side, what do you have to lose?" John chuckled. "So with this new eye, I won't be blind anymore, but I won't exactly see either." "We can't say for sure until after the procedure," the doctor responded. "But we expect improved night vision. However, you won't have color vision or depth perception from the prosthetic." John raised his hands in surrender, stopping the technical talk. "Let's just do it and see how it turns out. Where do I sign?" The surgery was done the next day, and John was bandaged as his tissues healed. The nanobots were expected to aid in the process, and everyone anxiously awaited the results. During his recovery, Dr. Malcolm made brief appearances, emotionally distant, but praising John's progress. The Institute had also provided John with access to information about his past life and the financial dealings that had led to his brutal attack. John spent hours on the computer, conducting his own investigation. He tracked the funds from the corrupted accounts, carefully piecing together every digital move his enemies had made. Despite the legal team's advice to let go of the past, John was resolute. He would get revenge on those responsible for his suffering. As John re-entered society, his facial scars made him unrecognizable to anyone from his previous life. People avoided him, and although the doctors offered plastic surgery, he refused. The scars were a reminder of his hatred for his ex-wife Eleanor and her lover Lenny. John wasn't finished with them, not by a long shot. On Friday, December 17th, 2021, Jimmy Sims, known as Sweet Jimmy, sat at his vanity, putting the finishing touches on his makeup. He hummed Aretha Franklin's Respect as he puckered his lips at the fabulous reflection in the mirror. With a curly wig and glamorous lashes, he twirled before the mirror, reaching for his sequined gown. A knock at the dressing room door interrupted his routine. "Sweet Jimmy ain't ready for visitors," he called out sweetly. The door's lock snapped as it was forced open, and a tall figure stepped in, dressed in blue jeans and a hoodie, the hood pulled low to obscure his face. "I won't take much of your time, Jimmy," a deep voice rumbled. Jimmy paled, a chill running down his spine. "Who?" "Relax, buddy," the figure said. "I'm not here to hurt you." Jimmy cautiously turned back to the mirror, eyeing the man behind him. "Zip me up, sugar?" he asked, trying to regain his usual flair. John snorted and stepped forward to zip up Jimmy's gown. "Sweet Jimmy always has time for his biggest fans," Jimmy purred. "And you're definitely one of my biggest." John stayed silent, but the tension in the room was thick. "I've got something else in mind," John said in a low voice. "A favor." "Oh, Sweet Jimmy loves doing favors," Jimmy purred as he slipped into his platform stilettos and strapped them on. "Come to the club on Friday night, and I'll make sure you get what you need." Sweet Jimmy blew a kiss at the mirror before fixing a smudge in his mascara. But why don't you tell me what you're really after, honey? He glanced at the man's reflection in the mirror. John pulled back his hood, revealing his scarred face. Jimmy's eyes went wide, and he turned to face John, reaching out to touch the lifeless glass eyes staring back at him. "Oh, baby," Jimmy crooned. "Who did this to you?" John allowed the touch for a moment before stepping back. "Let's just say I've got a score to settle with Sal and Polly." Jimmy gasped at the mention of their names. He knew all too well who they were. He shook his head in fear. "Oh no, Sweet Jimmy had his run-ins with those two. No way I'm getting involved again. They like to hurt people." "I know, Jimmy," John said calmly. "All I need you to do is get them outside, promise them anything, and I swear they'll never hurt you or anyone else again." John pulled a roll of cash from his pocket and tossed it onto the vanity. "For your trouble." The parking lot behind the Bearded Clam was dark and unpaved. Cars, trucks, and motorcycles lined the perimeter, with only the faint glow of streetlights from the front and side of the building providing light. The back door opened, letting the heavy bass of the club's music echo into the still night. Jimmy stumbled drunkenly outside, followed by two mob enforcers eager to indulge in Sweet Jimmy's company. "Oh, Sweet Jimmy is on fire tonight!" they hollered as he twirled away from them. Pulling out a cigarette pack, he held one up seductively and smiled. "Do either of you boys have a light?" he purred. Sal and Polly followed him into the center of the lot, growing impatient as Jimmy shrugged and lit his own. The flicker of the lighter briefly blinded them as they grumbled about getting their fun and heading back inside. "Well, well, well," an ominous voice interrupted from the shadows. "If it isn't Polly and Sal, how's it going, boys?" Startled, they spun around to see a dark figure emerge from the shadows of the dive. "Hey!" Polly barked angrily. "Who the hell are you sneaking up on us like that?" He balled his fists, ready to pound the intruder. "Don't you remember me, Polly?" John said, stepping forward. He pulled back his hood, but the dim light didn't reveal much of his battered face, except for the faint glint of his robotic eye. He grinned at the uneasy mobsters. Sal tried to sidestep into a flanking position, but John's reflexes were sharp. He grabbed Sal by the throat and yanked him forward, while simultaneously snatching Polly's neck. The two men's heads collided with a sickening thud, and they crumpled at John's feet. Sweet Jimmy's cigarette fell from his lips as he dropped the pretense of his feminine act. "Holy crap, dude!" he exclaimed. "Who the hell are you?" "Don't worry about it, Jimmy," John said quietly. "Just head back inside and forget this ever happened, okay?" Wide-eyed, Jimmy nodded vigorously and hurried back into the bar. Polly groggily came to consciousness in the early morning. The fresh ocean air and squawking seagulls disoriented him as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. He was seated on a cold wooden beam, his bare feet dangling into the seawater. Sal sat across from him, facing him in the same position. Polly felt the sharp sting of barnacles cutting into his back as he realized he was tied to a piling behind him. His mouth was gagged, and his hands were bound in front of him. Then he looked down between his legs, and his eyes widened in horror. His flesh had been nailed to the wooden beam beneath him, the large spike driven through the most sensitive part of his body. Sal was in the same predicament across from him. As soon as Polly became aware of the pain, it surged through him, intensifying as he tried to move. A lazy wave splashed through the pilings, spraying his face and chest. Across from him, Sal groaned and, upon realizing his own predicament, started screaming through his gag. "Good morning, boys," John greeted them warmly, stepping into view. The water reached his hips as he approached. "I wasn't sure you'd wake up at all. Thought you might drown on me," he said with a chuckle. The two men stared at him in terror, not recognizing the scarred face and mechanical eye looking down at them with amusement. "You don't recognize your own handiwork?" John asked. "Tell me, how's Lenny doing after I tried to bite him off?" He glanced back and forth between them as sudden recognition dawned. Their expressions became even more horrified. "Well, I guess you can't tell me much with those gags on." He laughed and held up an old green wine bottle encrusted with barnacles, clearly plucked from the sea. "Don't you just hate littering? Especially when we can reuse so many things nowadays." He gestured around them at the barnacle-covered pilings towering overhead. "Take this bottle, for instance," he said, swinging it over Sal's head. Sal flinched as the bottle shattered against the piling behind him, raining glass into his lap. "Now, this bottle can be used to cut," John announced, gripping a shard of glass. "Let me show you." Sal whimpered through his gag as John clumsily sawed through the rope tying his chest to the piling, nicking his skin several times in the process. The rope fell away. "Careful now," John warned. "Don't fall off the beam and end up hanging by that nail." Sal's eyes went wide as another wave surged, reaching higher. He clung to the beam in fear. John turned to Polly and started sawing at his rope, muttering, "Dang, the tide's coming in faster than I thought." He cut through Polly's rope, letting it fall loose. Now only a thin twine tied their hands together, leaving them vulnerable as the water rose around them. John stepped back, pointing a broken bottle at their tied-down limbs. "You've got a choice," he said, his voice firm as they stared in terror. "Cut yourselves loose or drown." He nodded toward their wrists. "I've bled a lot lately, and learned some things," he added with a grin, as if sharing a secret. "It's easy to bleed out, so you've got to be careful." A higher wave came in, almost reaching the beam. "That string around your wrists? It makes a perfect tourniquet." He glanced at them. "You know what a tourniquet is, right?" They stared back, horrified. "It's French for turnstile. Don't ask me why." He shrugged. "Anyway, tie it tight below where you're cutting. That way you won't bleed to pass away when you free yourself." His grin turned sinister. "See? No exsanguination." Another wave crashed in, threatening to knock them off. "Exsanguination," he repeated slowly. "Cool word, huh? Not French, it's Latin. Means bloodless." The water rose faster. "In a few minutes, the tide will be over you, so move quick." He eyed the bottle in his hand. "Sorry, I only found one, so you'll have to share." A large wave hit, nearly knocking them into the water, but John steadied them. For a moment, they looked at him with gratitude. "I can leave the bottle here," he mused, "but it might wash away." He paused, calculating. "How about this? I'll give it to the first one who tells me where Lenny and Eleanor are." The men exchanged desperate glances. "Don't take too long," John warned. "Time's ticking." That evening, a sleek black Lincoln Continental glided through the city streets and into a garage, descending to the executive parking area. It stopped by the elevators. The driver opened the door for Lenny, who then helped Eleanor out. Arm in arm, they stepped into the elevator, Lenny pressing the button for his penthouse. Unexpectedly, the elevator stopped on the 5th floor. A large man in a hoodie and sunglasses stepped in. Lenny glared at him. "This is a private elevator," he snapped. "Use the public one." The man silently held up a black access card, slid it into the VIP slot, and pressed a button for a lower floor. The doors closed again. "You've got a lot of nerve, pal," Lenny growled, reaching to grab the guy's shoulder. He didn't expect the man to spin around and press the metal electrodes of a taser to his throat. Eleanor screamed as the device clicked repeatedly, sending Lenny into convulsions before he collapsed to the floor. She stood frozen in horror as the man loomed over her and pulled back his hood. "Hi, sweetheart," John said cheerfully, taking off his sunglasses. "Miss me?" He gave her a few seconds to absorb the horror of his scarred face and artificial eye before zapping her with the taser. Once she crumpled next to Lenny, John turned to the control panel, pulling out a fire access key to reroute the carriage to the emergency vehicle deployment area on the first basement level. Lenny woke to the sting of repeated slaps. "Hey, Lenny, wake up! Time to face the music!" John yelled, leaning over his crumpled body. Lenny shook his head, trying to clear it, realizing he was bound hand and foot, lying on the floor of a small compartment that seemed to be moving. He was also completely unclothed and shivering from the cold. "What the?" he mumbled, looking up. His eyes widened in shock as he recognized the disfigured figure standing over him. "Who?" "Don't you remember me?" John asked cheerfully. "We were real close just a few months ago." A muffled whimper came from behind, and Lenny felt another body pressed against his back. "Ellie, baby!" "Oh, isn't love grand?" John sang as he grabbed Lenny by the face, pulling him up to sit against the bulkhead so he could see John's ex-wife. Eleanor was similarly tied up, curled in a fetal position on the cold deck, sobbing at his feet. "Come on, Ellie," John chided. "Don't be a downer. Tell him." Eleanor looked up at John's mangled face, weeping. "Please, John," she whispered, barely audible through her sobs. "Johnny?" Lenny asked, stunned. "But you're dead. Polly and Sal said they fed you to the sharks." John smiled, shaking his head. "Oh, Lenny, they botched it. I accidentally fell out of the car onto the street so they couldn't just come back and finish the job." He spread his arms mockingly. "So they lied to you. Can't get good help these days." The deck beneath them shifted and rocked slightly. John turned away and walked toward a small ladder, pulling down a duffel bag from above. He rummaged through it and pulled out 2 brick-sized packages wrapped in dark plastic. He stuck one on either side of the bulkhead above their heads, pressing a small button on each, causing red lights to flash. "What the hell are you doing?" Lenny asked, his voice rising in panic. "Well, Lenny, I'm a bit ticked off, John said pleasantly as if they were chatting casually. After everything you put me through and you didn't even have the decency to eliminate me. He grinned at the terrified man. Payback's a real pain, huh? He gestured around casually. We're currently drifting off the Outer Banks on this little cruiser that no one will miss. He reached back into the duffel bag, pulling out 2 cinder blocks, setting one beside each of them. Using a length of rope, he tied a block to each of their bound feet. I've placed shaped charges all around the hull, John explained calmly. Once I detonate them, the bottom of the boat will fall out, and you two will go right down with it. He gloated, enjoying their terror. Did you know great hammerhead sharks migrate through here? He smirked. Well, it's been nice knowing you both. Lenny and Eleanor screamed in terror, their desperate pleas echoing in the small cabin. John ignored them, focusing on climbing the ladder to the hatch. He exited, leaving them to their fate. Once on deck, he looked around into the darkness, seeing only empty ocean in every direction, even with his enhanced optical eye. He moved to the side of the boat, climbed over, and dropped nimbly into a gray Zodiac tethered next to the yacht. After casting off, he pulled the cord on the outboard motor. It roared to life, and he cruised slowly away from the doomed vessel. Reaching into his pocket, John pulled out a trigger. Without hesitation, he flipped the switch. The explosion's thud reverberated through his inflatable, vibrating his feet. Had he looked back, he would have seen the small boat shudder before sinking beneath the waves in seconds, leaving no trace. It was nearly a 2-hour trip back to shore, and John smiled into the darkness, thinking about the future. A burden had been lifted from his soul, and for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. Monique had left several magazines scattered around, featuring handsome celebrities and male models with dark eyes and chiseled cheekbones. His eye could be easily modified to match the other, or so the expert said. He sighed as the sea spray shot his face. He could even put up with the constant poking and prodding from the Institute staff for a while. After all, they'd been more than helpful with his little vendetta. He supposed he owed them that much.